Top Secret Files, Dien Bien Phu in the Air, Linebacker II, American Pilots and the Terrifying Air Defense Fire.
Dien Bien Phu in the Air, or Operation Linebacker II as called by the U.S. Air Force, was the most ferocious aerial bombardment campaign in world history.
At the end of 1972, as negotiations stalled and domestic anti-war sentiment rose in the face of mounting opposition, the United States decided to execute Operation Linebacker II, aiming to defeat Vietnam, a determined adversary, despite being overwhelmed in terms of balance of power and weaponry, still resilient in its resistance and victorious against the strategies and combat technology of the most fearsome war machine in the world, according to CNN data. Operation Linebacker II, starting on December 18, 1972, December 17, 1972, Washington, D.C. time, mobilized over 200 B-52 bombers with approximately 730 sorties, carpet bombing Hanoi, Haiphong, and many provinces in the north over 12 days and nights in late December 1972. U.S. estimates also suggested around 1,600 Vietnamese civilians perished during the intense 12-day period. The U.S. Air Force also suffered losses that are still incalculable to this day. Dozens of B-52s, once the pride of the U.S. Air Force, were shot down, along with dozens of pilots losing their lives. Worse still, despite ongoing debates among American and global historians about the impact and effects of this campaign on the course of the war, the majority of the public believes that many American pilots perished in vain. Half a century has passed, but the memories of those American pilots remain as horrifying as if it were just yesterday whenever they recall their sorties into the firestorm of Vietnam's air defense in 1972.
Christmas in the Midst of Death. In a series of CNN interviews conducted on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of Operation Linebacker II, an anonymous former U.S. pilot recounted, "The air defense network was so dense that it felt like you could walk on top of the missiles being fired into the sky. There were a lot of missiles aimed directly at you." According to this pilot, the night sky was so illuminated that you could read a newspaper in the cockpit. The same pilot revealed that, to avoid creating a negative psychological impact on the morale of the pilots, B-52 sorties, which were described somewhere before this campaign as just strolls in the skies of Hanoi, were conducted at night. After dropping their bombs, the B-52s from Utapao, Thailand, and Andersen Air Force Base, Guam, would return to base and land under cover of darkness. Thus, the flight crews wouldn't realize who among them didn't return until the next day. Wayne Wallingford, an electronic warfare officer who participated in 7 sorties with B-52s penetrating Hanoi from Utapao, recalled, "The next day, you would see the adjacent room open on both sides, and people start packing up the personal belongings of the pilot in that room to send back to their families." That's enough to understand that the entire flight crew would never return. It was truly heavy to witness those things, according to U.S. figures. At least 33 times during the campaign, U.S. Air Force personnel had to perform such grim tasks. The ground losses were equally horrific and unbelievable. The figures illustrate the inhumanity of just one aerial campaign by the world's largest war machine and the unparalleled determination of the Northern Army and people. In just one night, in the Cam Thien neighborhood, 287 people were killed, most of them women, children, and the elderly. Over 2,000 houses were destroyed after the B-52 carpet bombings, CNN data. A journalist from the AFP news agency arrived in Cam Thien immediately after the U.S. Air Force bombing and described the scene as devastated, desolate, and mournful. Jean Leclerc du Sablin's dispatch to the New York Times headquarters on December 29, 1972, read, "There are only a few intact houses left on Cam Thien Street. Many houses were blown away, roofs and windows included. Cam Thien Street is filled with bomb craters, some of which are over 10 meters wide and 3 meters deep. Amidst that rubble is an extremely haunting sight. An old mother is raising her arms, crying out, 'My child, where are you?' How can I find you to bury you here? The Americans are so cruel. These images from Western media outlets showed the brutality of those who claimed to bring the North back to the Stone Age through destructive warfare, the horrifying devastation caused by B-52s, as well as the deep-seated hatred and steadfast determination of the Northern Army and people.
The motivations behind Operation Linebacker II, the driving force behind the air strikes on Hanoi, Haiphong, and many provinces in northern Vietnam was U.S. President Richard Nixon's desire to withdraw from an unpopular war before starting his second term in January of the following year. Earlier, Richard Nixon had been re-elected with a promise to find peace with honor in Vietnam. As negotiations stalled, Operation Linebacker II was approved with the involvement of strategic bombers B-52 from 2 air bases in Utapao and Guam. However, Richard Nixon had no idea that the aircraft considered the most formidable in the world would encounter the most formidable air defense system in the world. With 8 engines, the Flying Fortress B-52 could carry up to 80,000 pounds, equivalent to over 36 tons, CNN data, of weapons. This strategic bomber, first introduced in 1954, was designed to fly across continents and deliver nuclear attacks anywhere in the world. Alongside intercontinental ballistic missiles and nuclear submarine missile carriers, the B-52 formed the U.S.'s strategic nuclear triad expected to deter any potential nuclear war. With a flight ceiling beyond the naked eye's range, the B-52 was expected to deliver devastating attacks on Hanoi. As historian T.W. Beagle wrote, the driving force behind Linebacker II was Richard Nixon's desire to maximize psychological pressure on the northern people. And the B-52 was the best tool to achieve this goal.
Flying into danger zones, according to accounts from B-52 flight crew members, on the first night of the campaign, Vietnam shot down at least 5 U.S. bombers, CNN data. What's worse is that upon returning to Utapao, casualties increased as many aircraft were limping back to base. The words of a general that day still echo in Wayne Wallingford's ears to this day. That person said that the enemy would suffer even more losses, but according to Wayne Wallingford, those were encouraging words with no weight whatsoever. In reality, the downing of B-52s shook the morale of U.S. Air Force personnel at both Utapao and Guam, but had the opposite effect in Hanoi. That's because before, Vietnam had concerns when the U.S. always touted the B-52 as an invincible flying fortress. However, after B-52s were shot down, the Vietnamese military and people knew that B-52s could also be downed like any other aircraft. By the third night, Vietnam had seen through the U.S. tactics, which made the U.S. Air Force pay an even higher price with more B-52s shot down. According to the tactic, B-52s would fly along predetermined routes and, after dropping all bombs, turn back to base. This was when electronic jamming devices would be aimed upward, making the flying fortress more vulnerable than ever. According to Wallingford, in the final 2 minutes of each sortie, we were instructed to fly straight and level, which meant the B-52 was just like a sitting duck. The electronic warfare officer also added that when the bomb bay doors opened to release bombs, the B-52's position became even more apparent on radar screens, and it was like inviting failure. With all these factors combined, according to another electronic warfare officer Ron Bartlett, Linebacker II airstrikes were nothing more than an electronic game where B-52s were easily taken down by the enemy. Just on the third night of the campaign, 6 B-52s fell from the northern skies, CNN data 2022. These losses left the American public and Richard Nixon unsatisfied. The U.S. was forced to sign the Paris Peace Accords on January 27, 1973, with terms ending its involvement in Vietnam. Speaking of Operation Linebacker II, former U.S. Air Force pilot Robert Hopkins warned that it was a wound deeply imprinted on the spirit that would last for many years to come. According to historian Pierre Asselin, in Hanoi, the last days of December 1972 are the story of a fierce and glorious victory of the Northern Army and people against the strategic attacks of the enemy, and in fact, the losses for the U.S. were so significant that Richard Nixon had to ask Hanoi to resume negotiations unilaterally and to cease the unconditional bombing of the North. Thank you for watching and supporting the channel. Please subscribe to receive the latest videos. Purchase unique Vietnamese products on our website, and we will ship worldwide. My website, https://vhshandmade24h.com.